Dr. Glover, you've said that the nice guy isn't actually nice, that he's just terrified of being rejected. Why do you feel so many men in the modern world today are living this way without realizing it?
All right. Couple questions in there to start with. So yeah, in No More Mr. Nice Guy, where I introduced the idea of the nice guy and the nice guy syndrome, one of the first things I dive into is that the nice guy is not necessarily a nice guy, which seems, paradoxical or contradictory. And it would have been to me, you know, back when I was in my 20s or 30s, if, somebody said, Robert, you're not a nice guy. I know you think you are. In fact, my ex-wife told me that. She said, everybody thinks you're a nice guy, but you're not. You need to get into therapy. If you don't go get therapy, I'm going to leave you. And I thought, well, okay, you're the one's unhappy all the time. So what I did begin to find out over time as I went to work on me and then started working with a lot of other men that identified as nice guys. I was a marriage and family therapist. Was it often a nice guy because he's trying to do two things. He's trying to manage his anxiety and his shame. And so we're going to come back to that in a minute. And by trying to do that, what he's doing is trying to become what he thinks everybody wants him to be, so he'd be liked and loved and get his needs met, and trying to hide anything about himself that might get a negative reaction from people, that might get him rejected, abandoned, shamed, scolded, beginning in childhood. So he's hiding his feelings, his wants, his emotions, his sexuality, anything that might get a negative reaction. So anytime anybody's trying to become something other than what they are in order to please people or hide anything about them, he's not being his true self. He's not being his authentic self. So he's not an honest, authentic man. And often because nice guys are trying to keep the peace, avoid conflict, trying to do everything right, they're anything but honest. In fact, that's one of the first things I went to work on, was dealing with me being an honest person. Because here I thought, I'm a nice guy. Nice guys are honest. But I wasn't. I didn't tell the whole truth. I would leave things out. I would try to keep the peace. I'd avoid conflict. I wouldn't break up things that I thought might upset anybody, particularly the woman I was married to. So there are so many ways that nice guys aren't so nice. They're dishonest. They can be passive aggressive. They don't set boundaries. They don't ask for what they want. There's just a whole, and we can start, pulling apart all of these. And what was the second part of your question? I got the first part about the not so many nice guys. I can remember both parts.
I just think why are so many men today in the modern world living this way and not realizing it? And maybe you pointed at it with the two things that really stood out there to me is they're trying to avoid their shame, and they are wanting their shame and anxiety while still trying to get their needs met. So is there a correlation there that guys are ashamed of what they actually want?
Yeah. And that's a big piece, because my view of nice guys is that for most men, this begins really early in life, as infants, as children. And as infants, we're all about needs, right? But we can't get our own needs met. We're dependent on our caregivers for our needs. And as children, all children, when we experience anything uncomfortable, we're hungry and we don't get fed. We're cold and we don't get wrapped up. We got a bellyache and we don't get burped. We shit in our diaper and we don't get changed. Anytime that happens to a child, they internalize emotionally, they're the cause of that. Now, they don't think it because we don't have that part of our thinking brain online yet. But the emotional part of our brain, the fight, flight, freeze part of our brain, the part of our brain that's managed by the amygdala, that manages our heartbeat and respiration and survival, that stores up emotional memory. So these emotional memories, we believe we're the cause of these painful experiences. And all children have these experiences, and all children internalize them. And then all children try to find ways to manage both those uncomfortable feelings and try to prevent the things from happening again in the future that cause the uncomfortable feelings. And they're doing it again with very primitive brains. You did it, I did it, everybody does. So being a nice guy is just one way. Some people might become perfectionists. Some might become rebels. Some might just sleep a lot, eat a lot, later on drink a lot. Some might look, a lot of porn. Any way to medicate those feelings of shame, and anxiety. I'm not good enough. I'm bad. I'm unlovable. I'm the cause of the problems around me. So I've got to become good enough and hide my badness. And so I would say, the majority of the population is walking around out there with both internalized anxiety and internalized shame, and using their own unique way of trying to deal with that. And trying to be a nice guy is just one of many ways.
You know what's interesting, Robert, is I mentioned before we started recording, the work that we do offline here with the Rebuilt Man is helping guys with pornography addiction. And we've been running this organization for about 6 years. And I think one of the things that has enabled us to be successful, and one of the things I recognized very early on, is guys' porn use is not sexually driven. Sometimes it is, but a lot of these guys, it's a tool of self-regulation. And I told you the reason I wanted to have you back here today is because the nice guy conversation is reoccurring in our communities. Every guy seems to come in that struggles with porn. Once we expose him to your work, some light bulbs continue to go off. And it's interesting you're saying here that these nice guy tendencies are rooted in a lack of understanding, real emotional awareness. And sometimes it's that first tool that a guy leans into. Instead of learning to express and regulate his emotions, he puts on this mask of being a nice guy. And then later on in life, because he's wearing this mask all the time, he's not emotionally aware of who he is. He hasn't developed any real time tools. So has this been kind of revealed to you there as well? Is that the similarities and commonalities with nice guy syndrome and some of these compulsive behaviors with porn? I know you mentioned a few other addictions there as well. What's the link between all of this?
Yeah, let's weave that in it, because that's a great way to pull them together. As I mentioned, when we experience uncomfortable emotions as children, we're like, like if you kicked a dog enough times, the dog's going to try to find a way to not get kicked and not have those bad feelings. And so children are doing that with very primitive brains, and so are we. The dogs are doing it with primitive brains, so are we as children. And so children will do that by through eating or sleeping or becoming needless or wantless or crying a lot. I sucked my thumb until I was in kindergarten. So you think maybe I was self-medicating in some way the uncomfortable feelings of my early life experience. And all children do this. We're trying to manage our uncomfortable feelings using pretty primitive tools for doing that. And because most of us, as we develop through childhood and adolescence, don't get taught what to do with uncomfortable feelings. I mean, we don't even talk about uncomfortable feelings, right? We're told, don't feel that way, or we just go to our room. And I spend a lot of time in my room as an adolescent listening to rock music. That was how I managed uncomfortable feelings of my angry, unpredictable, moody father, right? And so, we are all trying to find ways to manage our uncomfortable feelings. So if you just look at the world around us, just look at all the adults walking the planet. You see a lot of obesity. You see a lot of alcohol use. Now, because we're aware that we see a lot of the pornography use. And even, you might even find a lot of people that are walking around all fit and healthy. And they may also just be trying to regulate uncomfortable emotions by I'm going to get to the gym and be fit and be successful, and then I won't feel bad about myself, right? So I remember when I was working with a few bodybuilders years ago in my men's groups, it seemed like every one of those bodybuilders was afraid of being one slice of pizza away from being their old, fat, pimply, bedwetting self. And so, even just getting to the gym regularly was a way of managing uncomfortable feelings. So we don't live in a culture that teaches us how to do that. And, hell, we'll use TV, we use internet, we'll use religion, we'll use anything to deal with uncomfortable feelings, except feel the uncomfortable feelings. Now, we don't know we're doing that, right? It just feels normal, because what happens, you're in Tampa, I'm in Puerto Vallarta. It's probably warm there, maybe still kind of humid. It's late October. It's still warm and humid here. So I don't know about you, but I got an air conditioner up on my wall. I got a split unit air conditioner. I expect you might as well. And there's a thermostat, where I set the temperature of what I want the temperature to be. And that thermostat, if it does its job, I never notice a change in temperature. I never get too cold. I never get too warm if it's doing its job. It will just adjust how much cool it puts out, how much less it put. And we all have an emotional thermostat like that, that if we start to feel an uncomfortable emotion, might be boredom, might be fear, might be anxiety, might be hunger, might be tired. It could be any number of things. That emotional thermostat that is used to regulate and keep us regulated kicks in. And so without knowing it, we got an uncomfortable emotion perking up inside of us. And, we go browse the kitchen just looking for something to eat. Are we really hungry? Maybe, maybe not, but we're just browsing. Or, may go online and just start surfing, might just start doom scrolling Instagram, might get on YouTube and just keep watching videos. Might you just, this would be a good time to go to Pornhub. And, we just kind of go, we don't even realize that all of those different impulses are controlled by our emotional thermostat that says, let's go get into our comfort zone, get into our comfort state. So yeah, all that inability to handle uncomfortable emotions as children translates into various ways of doing that as an adult. It's like I said, all the way from food to religion to gambling to porn to social media these days. And we just think makes sense to us because our thermostat says, oh, go regulate now. So we do. And so I say in No More Mr. Nice Guy, I don't remember the exact figure. As a figure, it was just kind of a guesstimate anyway. But I said, I think about 80%, maybe more, of all nice guys have some struggle around sexuality. And for a lot of them, it is porn for a few reasons. One is that a lot of nice guys are challenged to go out and build healthy, intimate relationships with women, or if you're gay, with other men even. And because we're challenged to go do that, and because women kind of scare us, and because often we have a lot of sexual shame that we've internalized, it's just easier to go look at porn. Even just, scroll Instagram models, or go to, OnlyFans, or go find something that gives us a sexual hit. I call it safe sex. I mean, nothing's required of us. I mean, we never have, ED. We never, lose our erections. We never come too quickly. We never fail to please the woman if we go follow these safe sex. So there's one reason that I think that a lot of nice guys go the route of pornography is just because it's easy. It's safe, and we're not that good at forming relationships that would create sexual availability. Another reason is because for a lot of nice guys, especially a lot of religious nice guys like I was, is that we're taught that sexuality is bad. I grew up being taught that, if I looked at a woman's breast and lusted after them, I would spend all hell in eternity. And I've heard a lot of sermons on how long eternity and how hot hell is. And so, I better hide that, So we repress those sexual impulses. But anything that you repress gets expressed. It's going to go somewhere, especially sexuality, because sexuality is at the core of who we are as human beings. All living creatures have a built-in evolutionary, God-given drive to procreate after themselves. You mentioned that maybe you have some religious influence. I'll kind of be playful with the Christian guys that I work with, and again, because I grew up fundamental Christian. I have 2 degrees in religion. I was a minister for 8 years. And I just get how in fundamental Christianity, sexuality just seems to be the touchstone that, that is used basically to control people and keep them feeling bad about themselves. But I'll ask guys, do you know what the first commandment God gave to Adam and Eve in the book of Genesis? And most guys guess, don't eat of the fruit of good and evil. The first commandment God gave to Adam and Eve, I'm just going to be blunt, was go fuck a lot.
Be fruitful and
be fruitful
multiply.
and multiply. That's metaphorical, right? He said, go have a lot of sex. That's the first commandment God gave to humans. So sex is wired into us. Another interesting thing with Christians is I'll ask them, how many times does Jesus condemn people for having sex in the New Testament? And, people think, well, he must have condemned it a lot because I've heard a lot of preachers condemn it a lot. Not one time. Not one time does Jesus condemn somebody, and he had opportunity to. He had a woman caught in the very act of adultery. He had a woman, he was talking to a woman from Samaria who'd been married 5 times. He had plenty of opportunities to say, you're a sinner. He didn't. He didn't. He just say, hey, go and do better. Go and do better. And so religion is used a lot around sexuality that to try to control and manage and inhibit people, even though that's really not the message contained in Jesus's messages. So a lot of us grow up with, I say that almost all of us worldwide grow up bombarded with sexual stimuli, television, movies, advertising, MTV, social media now, pornography. It's just everywhere. And we're still being told we're bad for being sexual. All right. And I'm going to come back to pornography in a minute, but add another piece into this. I just finished a workshop here in my house this weekend. I usually have 8 guys in here. I didn't do it this weekend, but it's not unusual for me to do a little bit of a kind of a poll with the guys in my workshop. I'll ask them, think about to their first sexual memory. Now that could be anything. It could be first wet dream. It could be first kiss. It could be first time they saw dad's magazine with a naked woman. It could be the Sears catalog with a woman in her underwear. I remember those days. It could be, I'll show you mine, you show me yours with a neighbor boy or girl. It might have been being abused or molested. But I'll say, what was your first sexual memory? And I'll just have them kind of get that in their head. And I'll ask them, okay, how many of you, that was a positive experience? It was in the open. You could go talk about it. You could go tell your parents, hey, mom, dad, guess what just happened? And your parents would go, that's amazing. That's a developmental milestone. Let's go get pizza as a family and celebrate. No, nobody says that. I say, how many of you was it hidden? Was it dark? Was it shame-based? Was it guilt-based? Did you keep it to yourself? Did you feel like you're doing something bad? Yeah, everybody raises their hand. So really what happens to us culturally and in our families is that our earliest experiences around sex, especially if our parents don't talk about it, especially if our parents shame, our earliest experiences around sex are hidden, secretive, guilt-ridden, in the dark, fear of being found out. And so all of those things, the guilt, the shame, and anxiety get cross-wired to our innate sexuality. So guess what? Most of us grow up to where sex feels the most normal and maybe the most exciting when it's hidden, secretive, shame-based, or guilt-based. And then come along pornography. I mean, probably there's always been some form of pornography. And when I was a kid, I was finding somebody's dad's, Playboy, Penthouse, Hustler, or something like that. Now, when my son is 40 now, so he's a millennial, we got broadband internet when he and his stepbrother were 12, 13, 14 years old. I mean, we waited to get the broadband. We had dial-up before that. And I tell you what, no matter what we did to try to manage these 12, 13, 14-year-old boys, they found ways to spend all their time to either be stealing music on Napster or downloading porn or watching South Park episodes as well, which that's how I got introduced to South Park. Anyway, so we couldn't stop them. It was just so easy for them to get access to the porn. And this is before everybody was carrying around a smartphone that you could just go on Pornhub. And so what we actually did to try to slow down our adolescent boys looking at porn is we got rid of broadband and went back to dial-up because porn is not interesting in dial-up. It comes up a line at a time, a line at a time. You think, well, that's a boob. That's a boob. That's an elbow. And so it takes the fun out of it. So the thing is, porn is, like I said, I call it safe sex. It's easy. It's available. It's cheap. We can get it on our phone. And the best part of it is, like I said, not only is it our safe sex, but it is really effective in activating that cross-wiring most of us have with sex and shame. And so, yes, I'll go back to the original statement you made. I believe personally, this is my personal opinion, working with a lot of nice guys around sexual shame, sexual addiction, sexual acting out, and especially around pornography. I think for most men that where porn's problematic in some way. Might not be that they're looking at it hours and hours at a time, but it might be that, they've committed to their partner to not look at it, and they do. Things like that. Or they maybe even look at it at work or whatever. If it's problematic, I don't believe most are actually what would be typically called a sex addict. I know it gets categorized as sex addiction, but if you think about it, oftentimes they're not having sex. How do you be a sex addict if you're not having sex? I think most of the men I work with that are hooked on porn are actually shame addicts. They found a really effective way to consistently feel bad about themselves. In fact, I was talking to a guy took one of my workshops one time from Europe, and he goes, "We Europeans don't understand you American men." He says, "You guys, if you want to feel bad about yourself, you go look at porn." That doesn't even cross our mind because we says we don't have shame wrapped around porn. He says, if I want to feel bad, he says, I'll go out car shopping for a car I don't need and then hide that from my wife because he was a car guy. I'm going to go look at some new sports car and then not tell my wife about it because she's going to get mad at me if she finds out that I did it. So kind of going back to what you originally said, in my experience, that when that emotional thermostat kicks in and either we're feeling too good or too bad, we go find that I call it the emotional tree fort. Go find that little quiet place, pull the ladder up. Nobody can get to us. Now we can go look at porn and basically waste time and feel bad about ourselves. Come back into the world with some degree of maybe physical relief, but a bunch of emotional baggage we're going to go carry around with us.
Robert, that was so spot on, and it's right in alignment with what my experience has been here as well. And the piece that was really revealing to me is, I mentioned beforehand, we work with a lot of high performing men, guys that are working on Wall Street, business owners, entrepreneurs. I mentioned pro athletes. We got a fellow client and great friend in the World Series right now. What I've seen is a lot of times it's these guys upper limit in their identity. Things will be going really well. They'll close a massive deal in business, or something will be happening really great at work, or maybe up for a promotion. And then because they're out of alignment with the way that they see themselves, they attach themselves to that shame-driven behavior. Like you said, they're a shame addict. So they'll go act out just to bring back down their confidence. And another thing you said, I'm going to go way back to when you first opened up with that, was the fitness space. I spent 20 years in the fitness community. I worked in high performing bodybuilding, around a lot of very successful competitive athletes. Myself, fitness became a mask that I wore from a very young age. I had a lot of guilt and shame around my body image. As a kid, I was overweight, and I found the gym, and I found strength and confidence in learning to control my weight, but I never learned that emotional regulation. So through my 20s and early 30s, the muscle became a mask of the lack of really emotional security. But at the same time, I was wearing another mask of the nice guy. So it was like I had this strength athlete mask that sometimes I would put on. If like the biggest guy, when I walk into a room, nobody will know that I'm a hurt boy. But also when I get close with people in relationships, I would put the nice guy mask on. So I'm curious if you see the nice guy as a mask that guys wear, and what other masks are kind of commonalities where maybe we're wearing nice guy in our relationships, but then we put an alpha mask on at work. Are there any common themes there with multiple masks that nice guys are wearing?
I see that at times, but quite honestly, with nice guys, I typically see that if their nervous system is wired towards seeking approval, external validation, avoidance of conflict, don't rock the boat, go along to get along, be nice, smile a lot, be generous, treat people well, be different than dad, be different than all the bad men out there. We've heard women complain. What I've found is that most nice guys across the board tend to be nice guys in pretty much all situations, but that's not 100% true, because I've seen some nice guys that were like, they'll tell me, hey, I'm a nice guy at work. I'm a pushover. I can't fire anybody. I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. And I go home and I'm kind of a dick to my wife. Right. And I've heard just the opposite where guys, I'm a pushover with my wife. I give her everything she wants. I'm always trying to make her happy, but I go to work and, at work, I'm really, so I've seen it go both ways. In general, though, I found that if our nervous system is wired in a particular way, and like I can speak to myself. Yes, there's some situations in life I can perform at a higher level where my nervous system doesn't hijack me. Like, believe it or not, put me on a stage talking to people. Yeah, I like approval. I like people laugh at my jokes. I like them to, clap when I'm done. Of course I do. But I can just get on stage and I'm myself and just, you know, it's my gift. It's my zone of genius. It just comes out of me. Now, do I still also have those upper limiting things like you talked about, like the kind of Gay Hendricks idea from Big Leap? Yeah. It's kind of like, oh, I can get on a stage of 250 people, but what about 1,000? Could I handle that? I think again, my thermostat will kick in that says, yeah, we can go do this. We can handle that. We're good at that. But I don't even know how it's limiting me to some of these maybe bigger stages. But yeah, I've found that for most guys, like I said, including me, it tends to show up the most in our relationship situations, intimate relationships with partners, whether we're trying to meet women, date women, early relationship, long-term relationship. Those nice guys patterns tend to show up with that seeking validation, going along to get along, not wanting to rock the boat, not wanting our partners to be upset or unhappy with us. And tying that back, I forget what your original question was about it, but yeah, typically I see most nice guys, because it's a nervous system issue, tend to bring that to most areas of their life.
Most areas of their life. Yeah. We've seen a little bit of both, once again, because we work with the higher performer guy that's maybe succeeding in business. He's maybe able to put that leadership mask on, and then it becomes a pushover at home with his wife, especially because he's struggling with hiding some of the
I can
secret
see
behaviors.
that. I had an example that I was working with a woman back when I was doing mainly marriage and family therapy, and her husband came in and saw me with her a time or two, but mainly I was just working with her. And she told me the story that she met her husband when she was working as a dispatcher at a police department, and he was a cop. And she said she was just, working around him. She was just so turned on by him. So, just fell so in love with him, and they got married, and she quit working there. And I don't recall if she had a different job or just was at home or whatever. And she said he, once they got married and moved in together, when he'd come home from work, take off his uniform, take off his gun, take off his badge, he was just a total pushover. Yeah, dear, whatever you want, dear. Yeah, whatever makes you happy. Sure, we can do that. What do you want to do tonight, dear? And she said she used to have to go on ride-alongs with him in his cop car just to get that old feeling back of watching him as a man of authority, a man who, had boundaries, a man who got things done. So yeah, that can show up. And the highly successful nice guys that I work with, because in a sense, it is almost a little bit of an oxymoron for a nice guy to be highly successful. Now, one thing that I've said about nice guys for a long time is that nice guys tend to be good at being good, but not great at being great. And for various reasons. I even have a course. In fact, it's the very first course I ever put together after I wrote No More Mr. Nice Guy, called Nice Guys Don't Finish Last, They Rot in Middle Management. So most nice guys are pretty conscientious and can do stuff well enough to, do well, to look successful. You don't see a lot of obese nice guys. You don't see a lot of nice guys that smoke. Most of their vices are pretty well hidden, out of sight because they want to look good. And also you don't see a lot that are super successful, because for most nice guys, that actually goes against their core belief about themselves and a core belief about the world. So, for example, there was a guy in my workshop this weekend, bodybuilder guy, been into fitness since he was 13, owns a number of fast food restaurant franchises, been investing in the stock market since he was 13. And one of the things we dealt with him throughout the weekend was it's never good enough. He's never good enough. He's never going to accomplish enough that he feels like, oh, okay, I don't have to feel like that pimply little 13-year-old boy that had really long eyelashes and I got teased by all the kids and I was skinny. And so probably for some of these high-performing people you see, probably have some really innate natural talents, maybe athletic talent, intellect. They got some really good skills like at making money. Because I work with some nice guys that are multimillionaires. They're good at making money. But also every single one of them is trying to compensate for some sense of lack inside, like you were when you're in the gym. Yeah. To the world, I look successful. To the world, I can make money. To the world, I can perform at a high level of sports. But inside of me, again, like I'm just one bad deal from feeling like a loser. I'm one strikeout at the important time from feeling like a loser. One piece of pizza away from feeling like a loser. And so it's that fear of being not good enough that drives them. And I'll talk with guys that I work with. I know people like Grant Cardone and David Goggins and Alex Hormozy are all really popular with a lot of guys out in the men's field. But I often say I wouldn't want to be in their skin. They all strike me as people that are just running as fast as they can to avoid the demons that are chasing them. So I think that's where you might see, the high performing nice guy. He's trying to outrun his demons. And again, he has a fear that he's just one slip up away from being back down there where he feels like he's, whereas toxic shame says, no, this is who you really are. You're this worthless, can't be loved, can't get your needs met, nobody cares kind of person. So it's funny though that these high performing guys will go have something in their life, like you say, that kind of brings them back down to where it feels normal, i.e. shame, right? And so the higher, the bigger of the success they have, as you said, they got to go find that plane that feels more normal to them, feeling like they're broken and they're not good enough. And porn's a great way to do that. I mean, there's other hidden secretive behaviors that can do it as well. Gambling could do it. Debt can do it, but porn does it real effectively.
It's interesting with your client that you talked about there, the cop, the wife to the officer, how she was incredibly attracted to him early on. She met him out in the field, and when he had the uniform on, strong, alpha driven. The minute she was behind closed doors, though, in his personal intimate space, it's almost as if he became a different person. I had an ex-girlfriend. We dated for about a year, and then we made the decision to move in together. We cohabitated. And that relationship ended up fizzling out a couple years later. And she was strong enough to tell me at that point that it was the day she moved in that she felt a change within me. And through my own kind of healing discovery journey, I realized what I felt at that time is I felt somebody was infiltrating my personal space. When we were outside my home, even if we were dating and I brought her in, she wasn't living, she wasn't in my personal space. But because I was still a nice guy, I was still hiding an addiction at the time. There was this, what happens when she really finds out? So I was always kind of on edge. I was always worried about, is she going to open up the laptop and find something? Is she going to catch me doing something? Because she was now around my personal space. And I think speaking to that middle management, somewhat successful guy that isn't breaking through and isn't reaching his fullest potential, achieving at the highest level requires true authenticity. You have to be yourself at all times. You could put a mask on and reach a level of success, but to truly break through that upper limit that we talked about, maybe Gay Hendricks kind of ideology there, is you have to be so confident in who you are at an authentic core. And a nice guy, a porn addict, is walking around with this false perception of his own identity. So I resonated a lot with that story.
Well, I one of the things I've found also that porn does, and I think I would say maybe almost without exception, and you since you work a lot, around porn, you could give a better view of this than me even. But I'd say at least probably without exception, every guy I've ever talked to where porn came up somewhere along the line, either it's problematic or it just came up and maybe we should talk about that, right? I think almost everyone believes at some point they'll quit. At some point, they'll stop looking at porn. And, however they're injecting the porn into their nervous system, they believe they will quit doing that, And in the addiction world, they say that addictions are not a quitting problem. They're a starting problem. That every addict has probably quit numerous times. But the problem is that they start again. And even a part of the addictive cycle often can involve the quitting. How many times back when people had their porn stash on DVDs or even stored up on floppy disk or whatever, how many times have guys thrown out the magazines, thrown out the VHS, thrown out the floppy disks, thrown out the DVDs, and then to later go digging through the garbage to find them again, or go into the, back then when you used to go to the video store to get the VA, you go buy another one. It's a starting problem. And one of the things I've found is that I think pretty much every guy I've ever talked to believes they'll quit at some point. They'll quit when they get a girlfriend. They'll quit when, they get married. They'll quit when this happens down the road. And I think another thing that porn can do well is create an intimacy buffer for men who are inherently afraid of intimacy, which is most of us, really. Most of us don't grow up super comfortable with intimacy. We think we may want a girlfriend. We think we may want to, get married. We may think these things, and when we do, right? But my doctorate's in marriage and family therapy, so I've worked with, countless couples. I've been in a number of relationships myself. All of us do something that I call, we create an intimacy comfort zone, or we could call it the intimacy discomfort zone, where, a man and a woman, two men, two women, whatever, get together, and together they co-create a certain amount of space between them that feels comfortable and manageable. Now, what happens if they actually get too close, too intimate, too real, too vulnerable, too available? That's going to scare one or both of them enough that they'll find a way to kind of push it away again. Right? And if it gets too far apart, that feels uncomfortable too, because now they'll go, the one with the anxiety attachment issue will probably start chasing and pursuing. And if one of them has an avoidant issue, they'll start. But what we all do is we find that zone of comfort, right? That's comfortable. We're not too close to feel too vulnerable and afraid of being found out. And we're not too far apart to fear that we're about to get abandoned or lose what we've got. And it's very unconscious. Again, it's on a thermostat, and there's two people co-creating it together. We often think, well, it's their fault. No, it's two people co-creating. That's kind of the basic rule of marriage therapy, couples therapy. It takes two to co-create that system, and both people must need it to exist that way, or it wouldn't exist. Now, what I found is that for men, porn can be a great way of creating that buffer. Like, for example, I've known guys that, said they wanted to date, said they wanted a girlfriend, said they wanted to have sex, and we went to work on those issues. But as long as they kind of had porn going in the background, that they never actually dove in to these other things. And maybe if they did get a girlfriend, they kind of kept her at a distance, or they'd keep going from woman to woman. And usually there's a twofold fear to it. One is the fear that if I actually get a girlfriend, I'm going to have to give up my porn. Because I think most guys probably do believe that. Yeah, if I have a girlfriend, I won't need porn. And she's probably going to expect me to give it up. I'm not going to tell her I look at porn, because most men don't do that. And the other thing is, and maybe this was you when your girlfriend moved in with you, is that, if she moves in with me, or if we get married, or if she has close proximity or access to me, she might find my porn, or it will limit my ability to use it whenever I want, because she'll be around. And how can I sneak off and use it whenever I want? If, I got to make sure she's watching her show, or she's on the phone, I'll go sneak away and use it then. So porn can create a beautiful, effective intimacy buffer, either in terms of, if I get in a relationship, I'm going to have to quit my porn. So I'll just look at porn another day or two and avoid getting in a relationship another day or two. Or once we're in a relationship, I can't let her get too close. I can't let her find out, my secrets. So it's a great way to buffer intimacy. And again, we might not think of it in those ways. We just think, this helps me get off. But I'm going to say that I'm going to keep going back. I think porn use is often metaphorical. It's usually not about sex. It's about something other than sex. It just uses sex as its driver, the thing that makes it so intense. But I think it's it's a way to feel bad about ourselves. It's a way to protect ourselves from intimacy, and probably serves any number of other roles as well that have nothing or little to do with sex.
That's that famous John Eldredge quote from Wild at Heart is, pornography is so dangerous and addictive to men today because it will give a man everything that he desires from a woman without requiring anything of him as a man. That buffer that you're speaking there is, I can get the sex, the release, the now in today's world, the emotional connection through things like OnlyFans and webcam, right? I can actually feel like I have a back and forth conversation and relationship on an intimate level with some of these women. And I don't have to show up as a man and be a provider. I don't have to show up as a man and be a protector. I can get all this without stepping into any type of identity of a real masculine
You
man.
throw AI into that mix as well. You
Yeah.
know, one of the things about, I think there's a lot of things problematic about AI. The whole different, whole different interview. But one of them, surprisingly, is how syncopatic it is of how it is programmed to treat you well and make you feel good and special and smart. And I was talking to, I won't mention the name, but he's my financial advisor, and he's in his 70s, and he's a big AI fan, has been forever. And on a call the other day, he asked his AI chat GBT, I think he pays like $200 a month for whatever program he has, a question. And I tell you what, the voice he had set up and the personality of his AI bot was this cutesy, chirpy young woman's voice, just playful and fun. And that's such a great question. You know what? And I'm thinking, and I even told him, I said, that is syncopatic as hell. And I said, I bet that person, that voice, that cutesy, sexy little girl voice on your AI probably treats you better than any other human being in your life. And you know what? That's a growing issue with AI, is that for people, I've heard that, like maybe for an old isolated person that isn't around people, having an AI companion can be a nice thing in the end of your years. But you know what? If you're 22, 25, 60, 70, and you're more and more and more going to an AI companion because they treat you better, it's easier than dealing with real live human beings. I mean, they talk nice to you. And even some of the AI programs, they've had to actually dial them back to where they're not so syncopatic, where actually they would probably be better for us if they sounded more like robots, kind of with a digitalized voice, rather than these sweet, cutesy little girl voices that, oh yeah, I love talking to my AI companion. And in a way, I don't know that's any different than porn. I think it's avoiding, real connection with other people. We're getting some basic needs met without really having to open up and risk and be vulnerable. And it's all coming from a fucking machine. It's a bunch of ones and zeros. So, and just wait till AI takes over the porn industry. I'm sure it's on its way.
Yeah, we just did a great conversation with, I don't know if you're, Larry Hagner from the Dad Edge. We just dove deep into deep fakes and how it's hijacking and infiltrating homes. It's interesting. We use a lot of AI on the business side of things. It's obviously really progressed our marketing and business development and course development. And with all the content that we've, developed over the years, is to really begin to understand my voice. It helps us in the copywriting aspect. But there was a sign to me, Robert. I was working on a project one day and we were going back and forth with the AI, and I asked something of it. It was going to take some time. It said, "Don't worry, brother. I got you." It called me brother, which is like a term of endearment that I give to my friends. And I had to step back and I was like, wait a minute. I went downstairs. I was like, I told my girlfriend, I'm like, ChatGPT just called me its brother. She's like, well, it obviously is, it's modeling the way that you speak. And it was just one of those things where it woke me up to like the reality of where the world and some of these technologies are going. Is, hey, we got to understand, man, that these are machines. They're going to create an identity and perception of real people. And if you aren't aware, you can easily fall into some of these traps. So yeah, there's something to be aware of for a lot of the guys out there.
No, that is where Mark Zuckerberg is trying to take us.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
To put goggles on us, put us in the metasphere, and it's all going to be virtual, right? Everything's going to be virtual. And again, the porn industry is just, this far away from everybody just putting on their virtual reality goggles, putting on the gloves, the suits, things around their penis. And we can just get everything done better than a human could do it. And so again, we are just steps away from them.
Well, you mentioned early on, going from the dial up to broadband, if you study this, you look back at time, porn was a driver for so much of these advancements in technology. It was always has been virtual reality. It was a reason.
70% of bandwidth, the internet bandwidth, is porn. Something like that.
Yeah. So it is a driver because there's so much money behind it. And these big tech porn companies are some of the massive organizations in the world. I want to pivot and ask you, because you talked a lot about this development early on of lack of emotional control. Nice guy syndrome is something that's wired as shame from a very young age. What role? Because we're living in a maybe what you would call a fatherlessness crisis right now. 40% of what is it, Gen Z or Gen Alpha, like grew up in a home without a father, and even the ones that father was there, like he wasn't really there. And I'm curious because you've obviously been writing about and studying nice guy syndrome for 3 decades now. What role is our relationship with our father play in our development of a nice guy, and the rise in nice guy syndrome being so prevalent in men's lives today? Is it due to lacking real strong masculine fathers in the home?
I think that's a very big part of it. And you're right. I've been watching it for 30 plus years. When I started working with nice guys 30 years ago and working on me, I, I was working with basically baby boomers and Gen X. And I'm a tail end baby boomer. I'm going to be 70 in a couple months. And the message I heard from most of the men I worked with at that time was most of them did not have a close connected relationship with their father. The parents were either divorced, dad was gone all the time, dad was angry, dad was abusive, dad was alcoholic. A few guys reported, some degree of connectedness with their father, but most of the men that identified as nice guys did not have a close, safe relationship with their dad. And that my dad, he played ball with me, took me camping and fishing, so I had a lot of good bond with him. But he was also just highly unpredictable with his moods and his anger. So yeah, I had that challenge to get close. And my mother raised me. She told me as a boy she was raising me and my brother to be different from my father. And so there was even that message. So I think there's a lot of factors that go into creating nice guy syndrome. And we can kind of talk about some of those mothers, even just the social dynamic around men. But one thing that I've noticed now as I've continued to work with nice guys, and now I'm talking with millennials. My son's a millennial. He just turned 40. And Gen Z, is that now what I hear from a lot of the young men isn't the same thing. Oh, my father wasn't there, or I never saw my father, or my father was angry. I mean, there's still some of that, of course. What I hear more was my father was a nice guy, and all he taught me was don't piss off my mother, because that's what he was trying to do. So not only have we did like my generation grew up basically alienated from our fathers. We're trying to be different in the way we raised our sons. And because we were walking on eggshells with our wives, trying not to upset them, that's what we taught our sons. And I know that's what I taught my son and stepson to a certain degree. They were teenagers when I was writing No More Mr. Nice Guy. So that has shifted as well. But where I think there's a commonality, whether somebody who's 70 or 17, is that I personally think that throughout perhaps all of human existence, for the first few years of a boy's life, he was highly influenced and really under the power of females. If you think about it, we come into this world and our mother's usually our first caregiver. Nowadays, it could be, a nanny or a babysitter, or we go to preschool. Maybe back in tribal days, all the women raised all the kids together. So I think for the first few years of life, whether we lived 100,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago, or now, the reality is a boy's going to be highly influenced by a feminine presence. And it makes sense that little boys would need to learn how to please a woman because their survival depends on it, whether it's mom, nanny, babysitter, some other caregiver, even getting into the school system, which even when, I was in school, I only had one male teacher in my first 6 grades of school. So, not only do you have to learn your reading, writing, and arithmetic to get from 2nd to 3rd grade, you have to learn how to please a woman, right? Now, even more than that in the school systems with the whole introduction of toxic masculinity and boys being, expelled for just doing stuff that boys do. Even if they just point their fingers like a gun, you can get expelled from school nowadays, right? That's what little boys do. And so we've got almost a concerted effort in the school systems to feminize boys, right? So in a way, though, none of that's the problem. I think boys always grew up dependent on the approval of women because we needed them to take care of our needs when we were 2 years old, 3-year old, 5-year old. But throughout history, other than maybe say the last 60 to 100 years, throughout history, at some point in a boy's life, he was taken out of the realm of the feminine into the realm of the masculine. Okay. All tribes, hunter gatherers, and our ancestors for 1.5 million years lived in tribes. Pretty much every tribe has an initiation, a rite of passage, where a boy gets taken from the women, goes through something painful, difficult, life-threatening. He's prepared by the men to do it. The men are there to take it through him. And once he gets through that, he doesn't go hang out with the women anymore. He's hanging out with the men, doing what the men do in that culture and that society. And now the women come to him because he has what they want. He's the strong, protector, provider, right? And so he doesn't have to chase women. He doesn't have to try to get women to like him. The women come to him. He's the decider of what woman he wants to choose to spend his time with. But even, for say the last few thousand years, even when we weren't hunting, gathering, tribal, most little boys, as soon as they were old enough to get out of the house, go help dad on the farm, pick up rocks, pick up eggs from the chickens, milk a cow, plow a field, learn a trade, put on a horseshoe. For the last few thousand years, boys were out around their fathers, their uncles, their cousins, their grandfathers, learning how to do masculine things. They weren't in the house hanging out with mommy and the girls. And so because of that, at some point, boys learned to orient themselves to men and connect with men and do whatever men things were at that point of history and time. And again, they didn't have to chase the women. The women came to them because they had what the women needed for them to be able to procreate and survive. What's happened is not so much that, boys had too many female teachers or too many female caregivers growing up. I don't think that's really even the problem. The problem is that at some point in their life between, say, 8, 12, 14, 15, they don't have an experience where they get pulled into the masculine world. Used to be sports did that quite a bit, but even a lot of the competitive sports that used to exist don't so much. Military used to do that to some degree. Going to learn a trade did that to some degree. Prior to World War II, most of the workforce was predominantly male. There were some women, but that was kind of the exception, not the rule. I'm not saying this is good or bad in terms of, who should be in the workplace. All I'm saying is that the big difference, and it gets more pronounced, I think, with every generation, is that fewer and fewer boys have any kind of rite of passage where healthy, loving, available, safe men initiate them into the world of men. So they grow up being fairly feminized. I did. And it seems like the younger and younger we get, the more feminized the young boys are. Not because I think women at a young age had too much influence, it's because men didn't come around at the right age and initiate them through a rite of passage into masculinity. So the Gen Z have a word for nice guys. They call them simps. They're the passively pleasing, they're more like the girls. The girls are, out kicking ass, playing soccer and getting degrees and being careers as CEOs. And the boys are just, online playing video games, smoking marijuana, looking at porn, not accomplishing anything. And they don't even know how to talk to girls. So yeah, whether or not it's a father thing per se, I think it's a masculine thing. The men are not initiating boys in any form. And again, I don't even think I blame the women for it. I think the women have always had an oversized influence on young boys until a certain age. Then the men took them over and initiated them. So I think that's what my generation was missing. I think it's what the Gen Zs are missing as well. That is still that dynamic of no rites of passage.
Obviously, the work that your groups and organization does, and we have a lot of common friends and colleagues that are doing incredible work in the men's space. So we're kind of like bottom up trying to solve this problem, but we're speaking it from a more social, cultural kind of shifting. Like, is there a way that I don't even know if I want to say the problem gets solved, because I think as humans, we're always going to have issues and fights, and there's going to be challenges just with human development and men's development there as well. Some people will say, right, we need to return back to a traditional, culture, men in the workforce, maybe not so much free sex available. Yeah. So what are the, once a guy is kind of waking up, what is his steps moving forward? Obviously get your book, get plugged into the work. But if a guy is at this point here, he's stuck with us and some of these things are ringing to him. Let's give the listener out there maybe some tactical steps to begin to win the battle against that internal nice guy.
Let me paint a picture for you. And this may not sound like I'm giving you tactical steps, but I think I am. So let me just paint a picture. 25 years ago, when my publisher set me on the road doing a book tour for No More Mr. Nice Guy, I went to several cities, New York, Chicago, San Francisco, LA, Seattle, Denver, and did book signings and did interviews with radio, TV, newspaper. And I got asked the question a lot: I see a worldwide men's movement coming? And my answer, I had some deep thoughts about it, but I didn't usually go too deep with the media because they can only handle so much depth. But my basic answer was no, I didn't think so, because I didn't think there was one unifying factor that would bring all men together in some kind of movement like feminism. Okay. Now, 25 years later, around 25 years or so later, I was wrong. I do believe we are in the midst of a worldwide men's movement. But it may not look like it to just the untrained eye. But I've been at this for 30 years. I mean, when I first started my men's work, all that I really found existed was kind of the mythopoetic movement of Robert Bly, Iron John. I went out in the woods, I beat a drum, I had a talking stick, I said ho. But there wasn't much else out there. Okay. And now with the internet, now with podcasts, people like you, I mean, I do 3 or 4 of these interviews a week on average. One time last year, I did 11 interviews in a week. And so that's too many. I can't remember what I said to who. Did I say that to the guy earlier today or to this guy already? So here's what I see happening. I see men going, oh, I want to learn Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I want to grapple. So they go find a dojo and they start doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Or they go, I listen to some podcasts and I really want to get in good shape. I want to see how much I can develop my body. So they start going to the gym. They get in the gym. Or, they're going through a breakup and they decide, my church has got a divorce support group for men. I'm going to start going to them. Or they're getting sober from drugs or alcohol or pornography, and they find a 12-step program. And so they start going to 12 steps and maybe find a stag. Or maybe they want to learn how to pick up women, and so they go to a pickup boot camp, and they find a bunch of guys to go out cruising and running their game on women. Or maybe they just, hear something about a men's group, a men's program. Maybe they find David Data's book, or maybe what. And so what's happening is men, probably kind of being very unconscious, are actually seeking out groups where they connect with other men. Might be in the dojo, might be in a 12-step group, it might be in their church, it might be in a dating boot camp, it might be in a men's program. And then as they're connecting with other men, guys are saying, hey, have you seen this book, Way to the Superior Man by David Data? Have you ever seen, No More Mr. Nice Guy by Robert Glover? Have you ever listened to Chris Williamson? Have you ever listened to, Stephen Bartlett? Have you ever listened to Tim Ferriss? And all of a sudden, hey, I'm in this men's program. I'm in this program with a guy named Connor Beaton. I'm in this Raising Man program. I'm in an integrated man program. I'm in this, and all of a sudden, there's this great crossbreeding, so to speak, going on of men unconsciously seeking tribe. They may think they're just wanting to learn to grapple. They may think they're wanting to learn how to pick up women. They may think I need to quit drinking, but they're finding men, and these men are telling them about this book and this podcast and this group and this program. And now all of a sudden, everywhere you go, There's on the internet, on Amazon, there's books, there's podcasts, there's interviews, there's programs, there's men's groups. Scott Galloway's got a book coming out. And he's already pretty well known for his economic work, but he's been on Stephen Bartlett's Diary of CEO several times. Tim Ferriss mentioned his new book in his newsletter this week. So all of a sudden, used to be when you just go out in the woods and say ho, and that's about all you had. Now, whether you go join a gym, join a dojo, join a church, join this, there's books, there's podcasts, there's all this good stuff out there that didn't exist 30 years ago. And what I see is a worldwide movement of male masculine empowerment, not going back to traditional values, not red pill, not, we're going to use this weaponize this against women. And because I was in Australia just this last month, and I spoke at 2 different men's programs there. Oh, it's so exciting. I was in Japan in April, spoke at a group of men entrepreneurs there. I'm going to Denmark in 2 weeks to speak at a men's program there. Going to Dallas in December to speak at programs there. I do my own programs. I get interviewed by other men's programs. I interview them. There's just this great movement going on, which will bring me back to maybe to answer your question of what do we need? I believe for men to level up to their best selves, to live their best lives, to be accountable, to be authentic, to be visible, to be integrated, to have intimacy, we need other men. We need other good men around us. That's the mantra of my program, good men doing better. I don't care if you find it in my program, Connor Beaton's program, I don't care whose program you find it in. There's good men out there doing work. And again, now there are good books out there. There's great podcasts out there. There's great men's programs out there. And men are finding them. It's changing their lives. It's changed my life. It's changing the lives of the women they meet, of their wives, of their children. So I really think we're on a really good track. And it's not some single track, like we're all lining up, to follow this guru or this thing. It is so hybrid. That's what I think makes it so good, right? Whether, you and I were talking about Sathya Sam before we go. I'm going to interview him on Thursday. I've been on his show. You've done things with Sathya Sam. You probably have different ways of doing stuff, probably, but you have similarities. Great. But the fact that you're not exactly the same, you're not clones of each other, you have different, great. That makes us stronger. That works with more men. So to answer your question, I think the answer to all of this, whether it's nice guy syndrome, pornography, compulsive behavior, internet addiction, gambling addiction, MGTOW, incels, I think the core issue is men connecting deeply with other men and then finding our resources to level up to the best version of ourselves, just like our ancestors did when they got initiated into the tribe of the masculine men. And then they had what the women wanted and the women came to them. So I think it's happening and it excites me. And I'm glad I've been a part of it and maybe, part of the foundation of all of this. And again, it's not any one person's program or any one person's book or any one thing that's pulling men together other than a desire to connect with other men, even if they don't know they've got that desire to connect with other men. So I'm excited. I'm optimistic. I think we're going in a beautiful direction.
Robert, that was so beautifully articulated, man. And it's been my experience as well. 6 years, nowhere near the depth in this work that you have been, but you definitely have been a leader and founder in this movement. And I know a lot of those guys that you mentioned there. And yeah, you said Sathya, right? It's his saying, change the man, change the world. And I get interviewed a lot here as well. And I'm optimistic about where the men's space and men in general, and you mentioned all these tentacles, right? Are able to reach guys from all across the world that maybe have different backgrounds, different views, perceptions, but we're all aiming at the same thing, which, like you said, is making men better again. And I think the underlying theme in a lot of this message is for a long time, men were told that they weren't good or they were broken or something about them. And a lot of these movements are rooted in telling men that you're good the way that you were created. Now let's become a little bit better. So I'm highly optimistic there as well. And I've really enjoyed this discussion. And I want to obviously point the guys back to your book. We'll have all that linked down. Tell us briefly about your Integration Nation, because I think when we had you on 4 or 5 years ago. You didn't have that group around. Tell a little bit about what it's about, where they can learn more. We'll wrap it up with a last and final question.
Yeah, we launched Integration Nation in June of 2023. I'm just a big believer of community. Like I just kind of wrapped that part with. I think men do their best when they're part of a tribe. And I don't even know that it matters what kind of tribe it is, as long as it's a tribe where they're called to be authentic, they're held accountable, they're supported. It could be, again, it could be learning Brazilian jiu-jitsu, it could be learning how to interact with women, it could be learning how to get sober. And so I've always been a fan of community. I've grown my most in community. And so we launched Integration Nation primarily to be a community built around kind of the ideas of No More Mr. Nice Guy, around the book, of how to have a safe place to let go of shame, how to have a safe place to be supported, held accountable, how to build connection with other men. And it's primarily virtual, but we also have an annual conference every year in January. We have one coming up in Playa del Carmen, Mexico, January of 26. And again, there's so many great programs out there. I get interviewed by their leaders. I interview them. I'm just a fan of just getting men into programs. And so, yeah, Integration Nation is my version of that. Then drglover.com has my classes, my workshops. Like I said, I just did a workshop here this weekend. It has my speaking, where I'm going to be around the world, speaking at different men's programs. It's kind of like, yeah, a bunch of guys in Australia said, Robert, we came to this just when we knew you were going to be here. And in Denmark, I know to be the same. I spoke in Dallas at a group called The Standard last year with Hafiz. He said, the guys loved you so much, we want you back again this year. So, yeah, drglover.com will let you know where I'm at, where I'm speaking, what kind of programs I got going on. And again, I'm just here to support the growth of men worldwide, whether you get in my program, take my courses, I'm okay. But I'd say to all men, don't try to do this alone. We weren't wired to be lone wolves. We're wired to be part of a community, part of a tribe. Whether you're working out at the gym, learning to grapple, getting sober, don't try to do it alone. Find a community, find a tribe.
Iron sharpens iron. And guys, we'll have all of that plugged down there in the show notes below, all the links to Robert's socials and his websites and books there as well. Last and final question, Dr. Glover. The title of our show is called The Superhuman Life. So maybe coming at this through the lens of men's work and masculine development, how would you define living a superhuman life?
Oh, how would I call living a superhuman life? You know what? It really would be built on the foundation of other men in my life. Because when my wife and I got married, we're coming up on our 9th wedding anniversary in about 2 weeks. And that first year married, is my 3rd marriage. And I'd seen the patterns that led to the end of the other marriages, partly on me. And I thought, I don't want to do that again. And I thought, if I don't have a support system in my life, the same things are going to happen that have already happened before. And at that time, I think I had 1.5 good guy friends in my life. And so I started looking for a men's program. And a client attending one of my workshops told me about a program he was in. I joined it in 2018, spent 5 years with it. I still have connections with it. And it has changed my life in so many ways. My marriage is strong and solid, 9 years going into it. I'm in good health. Financially, I'm doing well. My businesses are doing well. I'm making an impact on the world. I'm having fun. And so that superhuman, that's leveling up to our best version of ourselves is a life that we've built on the foundation of other men living similar lives. Like when I was in Australia, every guy I hung around with was a gym bro. Everybody was in amazing shape. And I've got a nutrition coach. I've been working with her for 1.5 years, and she has to kind of keep goading me to get to the gym more regularly. And I tell you what, hanging around a bunch of gym bros, I was in the gym a lot. And so, yeah, you want to level up to the best version of yourself is get around other guys that are living at the level you want to live at.
Amen to that. Guys, the legend himself, Dr. Glover, No More Mr. Nice Guy. If you haven't checked out the book, make sure to pick up a copy. Check out Integration Nation. We'll have the websites and link down there in the show notes below. But some key themes here that we drive home all the time. Don't do this alone. You are not broken. You were made incredible the way that you are, and there's a pathway out of this. So we love you guys for hanging out with us. If you haven't yet done so, make sure to subscribe here on YouTube, rate, review, do all the amazing stuff, and make sure to share this conversation with as many people as you possibly can. But for Dr. Glover, your host, Coach Frank, we love you guys, and we'll see you in the next one.